Hi fellow Django developers, Ezekiel here from alwaysdjango.com, where we discuss interesting Django topics that help you grow, improve as a Django developer. So if that sounds interesting, like, subscribe, share this video with anyone you feel would find this video important. Let's get into it. So from the last tutorial where we discussed about Django templates and template variables, template groups, template conditionals, and template filters, right? If you don't know what those are, go and check in the playlist. I'll leave a link to it in the description. So now, like you can see right here, this is where we left off. Like you can see right here, we are passing in the name of a book to a template, right? But for a normal Django application, for a normal web application, this will not happen, right? You can't really be passing in these variables from a template, right? You can't have maybe list of books, maybe 100 books, and simply passing it in to the template and maybe loop over it. That's where database comes in, right? That's the biggest advantage of using these frameworks and backend frameworks, right? The interacting with the database, right? So that introduces us to what is called models, right? So what are models? I discussed this in our first 2 thread videos, right? But because we are concentrating on models right here, I'll recap on it. So models are class representation of our database, right? So what is that? What are we meaning by that? So in this models.py file, right, for every application, if you don't know what apps are in Django, check the playlist or discuss apps, or I'll leave a link to the video itself in the description. If you are using YouTube, it should be popping up right now. So apps are just basic building blocks of a full Django application. So in this app that we created during that tutorial, we have this models.py file. So this model.py file will have house the models for this books application. So models are class representation of a database. So they are class representation, Python class representation of a database. So we'll create a class, have a name, obviously classes have name, and it will represent the database, right? So how do we get these models? So class, let's create a class book, right? So a book, then let's say pass, right? So right now this is simply a class. We have not made it a model. Now to make it a model, we have to inherit from these models, right? So we inherit from models.model, right? So right now this is a model in this application, right? So models, this class right now is a table in our database. This represents a table. Now what does table have? Table has field, right? And the fields have descriptions. We have maybe a book will have maybe book name, right? And that book name will have a description like is a character field, right? Is maybe a long character field, right? So descriptions like that maybe cannot be nullable, non-nullable, default values and what have you, right? So this book right now is a database table, right? So a book obviously will have maybe a book name, right? So models, a book name, right? So this is a field, right? This is a field right here in this database table. So how do we describe properties? How do add descriptions to this field, right? Obviously right now we don't know whether this field is an integer field, is a character field, is maybe a boolean field or what have you. So to specify that, you use the models dot. Now model dot, we see lots of options right here. I have the email field. Let me zoom in here. I hope you can see this clearly. So we have right here, we have the boolean field, binary field, big integer field, big auto field, base field, we have combine field, we have check, we have date field, date time field, digital decimal field, etc, right? So we have a lot of field. So right, so but for our name right here, we have a field called character field. So what does the character field do? The character field is just like to say this is a string field. This is a character field, right? It will contain a list of characters. Now this type of this field, the type of this field which was specified here as a character field, right, will have properties. Now properties like whether it's nullable, whether it's non-nullable, the maximum length, the default field, etc. Right? So this, for character field, they have a compulsory argument called the maximum length. Now the maximum length is the maximum length of this character field, right? Let's say maybe a book will have a maximum of 50 characters in its name, right? So more than 50 characters cannot enter as a name of this book, right? So let's say a book cannot be null, the name of the book cannot be null, right? So we don't want to be creating books in the database where maybe the name of the book is null, right? If a book's name is null, then it doesn't really make sense. So to say that, we say null is equal to false, right? So we are saying this field right here cannot be null. Now blank is also equal to false, right? What's the difference between null and blank, right? Null is the lack of anything, like nothing is existing. But blank is maybe something like, maybe you have name is equal to this, right? So something is existing here but is blank, right? So we are trying to say that this field cannot be null and also it cannot be blank, right? So have a book should have maybe a description, right, which is equal to models.text field, right? So what is the difference between a text field and a character field? The difference, if you know about database and database management, a character field is simply a char, that's char field, right? A character field. But a text field is a long char field, right? A long character field, right? So the difference right here is that this character field requires maximum length, while the text field does not require maximum length, and that's what we want, right? We don't want our description to have a maximum. We want the user to be able to write the description, like describe the book as much as it can be, right? So if I'm thinking about maybe HTML right here, this name will be an input field, while this will be a text area field, right? If that makes sense. Description, if I can spell it right? So there are many others. We have let me say is published, whether the book is published or not. Is published is equal to, so what do you want this published to be? What do you want this published to be? This is published cannot be a character field, right? It cannot be a text field, right? It cannot be a text field. It should be a boolean field, right? So we have boolean field, right? So a boolean field, the default will be true, right? So we'll say every book that is published, the default is published should be true, right? By default, the books is published, unless when creating this book we specify otherwise, right? So the next field is date created. Date created is equal to models dot. So date created, what should it be? It should be a date field. So we have date field right here, right? So but if you're using VS Code, to get the properties you can assign to these fields, you can simply hold Control and press your backspace, right? If you're Mac, it should be Command and backspace and space bar. Sorry, I'm very sorry, and space bar, right? So if you come here, you press your Command and space bar, and it brings out these values you can input right here. So right here you can see blank, choices, db index, etc, right? So here we have the default. So we want this field to be a field that date created should be the current time when it's created, right? So in Django we have from Django.utils we import time zone, right? So this time zone is a Django utility function or Django utility method class that gives us the time in the current time zone, right? So we say default is equal to time zone dot now, right? So what we're trying to say here is, when creating this book, user does not have to specify the date created. In this case, what needs to be specified is the name of the book, the description of the book. This is published, we automatically default as true, right? Date created will automatically default as this time zone dot now, right? So string representation, the string representation. So when creating models in Django, it's always advisable to specify this string representation. The string representation is, if you know about it in Python, it's just a string representation of this class, right? If you want to represent this class as a string, you return this, right? So I have a list of things. Sorry guys, I didn't mention this. I have a list of things we are going to look at in this tutorial. I've looked at what models are, so let's cancel that out. We have looked at what models are. Let's cancel that out. We have looked at model migrations. We have not looked at model migrations. So right now we have created this model, right? But the database does not know about this model. There is no way the database knows about this model. This is simply a class that is lying fallow on our project, on our files, right? Our project files, right? So in Django, there's something called migrations and making migrations. What is making migrations? Making migration is converting. Right now, our database, this is not a database query, right? We don't know what this, our database does not know what this is. So making migration is converting this class representation of a database into something database can understand, right? Something the database can understand and use it like database query codes, right? So to make migrations, so if we make these migrations, we now making migrations is converting this model we have created into a database SQL code. Now migrating means actually running those codes. Let me make you understand. Let's open our terminal right here. Let me stop the server. Let's say, let me zoom in a bit. So right here we have our model here, right? We have our model right here. So to make migrations, we say python manage.py. Guess what we have to say? Python manage.py make migration, obviously make migrations, right? So make migrations, so press enter, right? So what does that do? It converts. You can see migrations for books, which is the name of our app. We have created this migration, and it created in books migrations stroke 001. So if we go to this books application, under here we'll see a folder called migrations. If we open this 001 in it, so let's open this and see what we have here, right? So let's zoom back out. So in this migrations, you can see right here what we are seeing is that we have fields, create model right here. We say operations 1, create models. The name of the model is books. The fields are ID, the identification field, there's the unique ID field. ID is a big integer. Now name is a character field. Description is this, that, right? So this is, we have created the migration, right? But we have not sent it to the database. We have not run this migration to send it to the database, right? So how do you run this migration? Let's zoom in. How do you run this migration? We say python manage.py migrate, right? So what does this do? This migrates our database. This actually sends this model we have created right here. It sends it to the database, right? So if we go up here, you can see this red informations right here. Say you have 18 unapplied migrations. Your application may not work properly until you apply this, right? So these are default migrations that Django comes with. You can see the admin migration, the auth migration, the content type migration, the sessions migration, right? So these are default migrations that Django comes with. So after running this migrate command, right here, python manage.py migrate. After running this migrate command, this error message, this warning message should go out. Why? Because while running these migrations, we have run the migrations for our applications, right? So it has run the default migration for our Django application and this migration right here for this application that we created, right? I hope that makes sense. So if we run our server back on .run server, right, we can see our server is starting without the warning, right? Because we have run the migration, right? So let's zoom out. So right now the question might be, where is the database we are talking about? Now for why using Django? Django comes with a development database, which is the SQL database right here. The SQL database, the SQL database, I'm sorry, the SQL database here right here, the SQL3 database, right? So if you know about SQL3, it's just a flat file database, just good for development. So while developing, this database is very much okay for development, but maybe when you're deploying, we don't really use this database for deployment. You maybe use Postgres or MySQL or what have you. But for now, while developing, Django ships in with itself this DB SQL3 database, right? So this is your database for your application. And if you have been watching this tutorial, you know that we have not really set database credentials or what have you for this application, but Django comes shipped in with an ability to use this DB database. There's also you can also use other databases for your maybe development process or what, but that's not necessarily what we discuss in this tutorial, right? So the next, we have looked at what models are. We have looked at model migrations. Now the last topic right here is interacting with the models, right? So how do we interact with this model, right? So I've created this model, we have migrated this model. How do we interact with it to create, delete, update, and read, right? So in Django, there is something. Let's zoom in, right? Let's zoom in. Let me close this. Let's zoom in. We'll not really be using this, our code files right here. We'll be using this shell. Let me clear this. We'll be using this CMD, right? So Django comes with something called the shell, right? The Python shell, right? So to open this Python shell is like a place you can run Python codes on this application. So to open this Python shell, say python manage.py shell, right? So python manage.py shell, if it opens, it is like exactly like the Python shell, the normal Python shell, right? So right here we have our Python shell running, right? So you can write Python codes right here, right? So to interact with our database, I'm sorry guys, sorry for the noise. To interact with our database, to create, update, read, so what we have to do is, first of all, we have to import this model, right? We created a model right here. Inside this books application models, we have our model right here with the name book, right? So we import this, right? To import this, we say from books, this books application, books.models import book. So what are we saying here? We're saying from this book application, in the models file, in the models package, import this book class, right? Import this book class, right? So if you know about ORM, object relational mapping, right? It's just a way that makes it easy. Most frameworks come with it. Laravel comes with it. I think Flask comes with it also. Django also comes with it. So ORM is simply a way to interact with the database that is simple. And the advantage of ORMs is that you don't have to learn different commands, different SQL commands for different database types, right? So let's look at it, right? So to create an instance of this model, right? How do we create an instance of this model? We say book, right? Simply how we do it in Python. So we create an instance of this book. So book, right? So we have an instance of this book. So we specify the book name, the book description is published and date created, right? So let's say book dot name is equal to, let's say, test, right? Book dot description is equal to description test, right? So for the is published and date created, for the is published and date created, let's minimize it. For is published and date created, this is published, we have default values right here, default values. So if we don't specify these values, it uses these default values, right? So the necessary things we have to specify is the name and the description. Is published, date created have default values, right? So right now we have created the instance of this book, right? It's simply an instance of the book, right? So now to save it to the database, it has a method called book.save, right? What does this do? Book.save saves to the database, right? So right now we have our book, this book instance saved to the database. How do we confirm, right? So let's say books is equal to now book.objects.all, right? So to get all the books in this book model, right? So we say book, which is this book we imported here, the book we imported here, which is the model dot objects. It has a model in Django, has this objects property. Now in that property we have many other methods. We have all, we have create, we have get, we have filter, we have get or create, we have many, right? So this all is simply used to get all the properties, all the instances of the model that has been saved, right? So let's press enter here. So this, we have books here, so let's output this books. So what do we see here? We see a query set, right? Inside this query set is a list, right? In this list we have this book, right? What's the content of this book? Is the text book that we created, right? So this is the first instance. This is how you get all the books in all the instances saved to a model, right? So how do you get a specific instance? Now to get a specific instance, you use the get method. So let's say book is equal to book.objects.get, right? Get, let's say name is equal to text, right? So let's print out book. What's book? A book is a model instance. So we can simply say book dot name. We can print out the book name. We can say book dot description. We can print out the description of this book. Now to maybe update this book instance, we can say book dot name is equal to text 2, right? We have updated it, but we have not saved. So to save it, to say book dot save, right? We have saved it, we have updated it, we have actually made this change to the database. So let's print out the book dot name again, book 2, right? So this is a simple introduction to the ORM, how to use your ORM in Django. When we get into other tutorials, other topics, we'll look at how to filter out, how to create, we have looked at how to create, how to delete, and what have you. So to delete this, let's just look at it real quick. To delete, I think this tutorial is maybe over 10 minutes, 20 minutes already. So to delete, we say book, right? The specific book dot delete. It has a delete method in it. If we click on it, this book is deleted, right? So if we see books is equal to book.objects.all. So let's get all the books in the database again. If we click this and print out the books again, we can see this data set is empty because the only book stored in it has been deleted, right? This is it for me, guys. This tutorial is long already. I'm sorry if it took your time, but I hope you have learned something. Take care of yourself, guys. If you are not subscribed already, subscribe, turn off the notification. In the next tutorial, we will look at how to interact with this model from the views function, right? So in the last tutorial, I didn't mention how. So for most of our tutorial codes, right, I will be pushing it to this GitHub repository, right? This GitHub repository, YouTube complete my GitHub repository, YouTube complete Django beginner playlist, right? I'll leave a link to it in the description. So if you come to this repository, right? If you come here to the branches, you get a list of branches. Now in these branches, for if you want to maybe look at the code for the URLs and views tutorial, you come here and click on the branch. If you want to look at the code for models and database and what have you, you come here and click on the branch. You can then maybe download the zip code or git clone it, right? So that's it for this.